What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Good to have you guys with me here today. The chat is open if you're on a chat-enabled channel, so you're welcome to be a part of the conversation. Today's guest, if you're an Instagrammer, you very well could be one of the 117,000 people who are familiar with the Lucky Few, or the podcast as well. Today's guest is Heather Avis, and we're going to talk a bit about a topic. If you know her, you know the topic. This is a book she has out called Different, A Great Thing to Be. And Heather has, she's really entered into a space of encouragement and education that I think is very, very helpful. And she's got an incredible story. So, Heather, I am excited to have you here on Life Today Live. I do not hear your audio. Did something happen on your end? Because I heard you before we started. This is her website. It is heatheravis.com, and you can see the book. You can order the book there. If if you have need for a children's book, this is obviously a good one to have. But, we're not just talking about children's books. We're talking about special circumstances. So, Heather, welcome back. Great to have your audio again.
Thank you. That was so technical, right? It just all of a sudden went mute, and nothing was unmuting it. There was no clicking.
Crazy.
Working. Thank you for having me. Thanks for your patience with
all right, so let's
technology.
Let's assume for just a second that people don't know who you are and don't know what you do and your background. Tell us just your story so we can kind of set the platform here.
Yeah. So I am first and foremost a wife and a mom. My husband and I got married almost 19 years ago. We have 3 kids. Our oldest is Mason. She's 13. Our middle daughter is Truly. She's 10. And our son, August, is 7. All 3 kids came to us through adoption. Our oldest and our youngest have Down syndrome. My husband and I are both Caucasian. Our middle daughter is African-American and Guatemalan. So we are a multi-ability, multi-ethnic family brought together through adoption. And we live in Southern California. We run a nonprofit called The Lucky Few, basically meaning few of us have a loved one with Down syndrome. Those of us who do are extremely lucky. And we have a goal to shift the Down syndrome narrative and to make this world a more inclusive place for everybody. So that's in a nutshell who I am.
And that's a great nutshell, by the way. So I always get concerned when we start talking about adoption because I know it can be a very difficult thing. I know this because I was adopted.
Okay.
So, I joke, but you made some adoption choices that most people would not make. Most people, I think, if we're honest, they go into adoption looking for that, that happy, healthy, fulfilling my own dreams as a parent kind of situation. Whereas you seem to have gone with an entirely different approach. Why did you go that direction? Both with someone who's not of the same culture as you, and then obviously with the Down syndrome. That's a most people just wouldn't do that. What made you guys do that?
Yeah, we fell into the category of most people at one point as well. My journey towards adoption has shifted significantly over the years. We started the process about 15 years ago. What I thought about adoption, where I saw myself in the adoption narrative, every piece of it has almost completely changed in the last 15 years. I always say you can't know what you don't know. And I've just learned along the way. Avis is our lifelong learners. And so when I started the process, initially, it was because we couldn't have kids naturally. Mm-hmm. And it was a means to an end. Adoption was, I would like to be a mom. This is a way to be a mom. Mm-hmm. Where is my baby is kind of my mentality. Mm-hmm. In that journey, we found out about a little girl with Down syndrome who had been placed with our agency. And we're people of faith. And so there was just a moment of I really felt like a pulling or a draw towards this child, even though I didn't want that. So it's a very long story. There was a long journey actually a short journey, because most adoptions, it's like, hurry up and wait. And so we found out about her, and about a month later, she came home. But in that month felt like a lifetime of trying to decide, do we bring this baby home? Do we not? Who says yes to a child with Down syndrome? Who does these things? Like
Right.
this was our conversation. And it just felt like at the end of the day, there's this little girl who did need a mom and a dad. And we wanted to be a mom and a dad. And that seemed to be enough. And we said yes to her. I say it was my scariest and my best yes. Yeah. And really what that allowed me to do was just let go of all the control I had really been holding so hard to in my parenthood journey. I thought I had let go of it when we couldn't have kids naturally, when we were in the adoption process. I thought I let go of all this, but there was so much more that I was still trying to control and enter Mason into our life. And it's like, wait a second, all these things that people were really afraid of attached to a Down syndrome diagnosis, I don't see it. Like the things I was afraid of, I see this little girl and she's pretty magical and she's rocking my world in all the best ways. And is it hard? Oh my gosh, it's so hard, but parenting is so hard, right? Just any kid. So she really changed the trajectory of our lives. In our next 2 adoptions, we just felt a lot more open to whatever child would come our way, and felt a lot more equipped to enter into an adoption narrative in a way that's really healthy for everyone involved, for our kid, for their biological family. And when we said yes to our middle daughter, who we were presented with a Hispanic baby girl, so we didn't know that she was also African American. When we said yes to her, we had done some education and some learning and understanding on what that means to be white parents raising a child outside your race, and that there's a lot of intentionality that has to go there for my husband and I. And it's really hard work, and adoption starts from brokenness, and you can't ignore that. Like there's all these pieces we've learned over the years. So I think people who see our family for the first time or hear the story, it is this idea of like, whoa, how do you do this? And I'm like, we are just waking up in the morning, making scrambled eggs, like trying to keep our cool when our kids are irritating us, like, all the things that parents do. It's kind of what we do at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're doing a great service. We're going to talk about the book, Different, A Great Thing to Be, and some of the lessons in there. But before I talk about what, we should learn as an audience, I'm really curious about what you learned. You mentioned, you're a person of faith. I'm a person of faith as well. Okay, let me set this a little bit better. I have found that when we are called to something that is beyond our perceived or even real abilities to handle, that when we are truly called, we are given the grace and the strength, and hopefully the wisdom to go through that process. Did you find that was the case? Did you feel like you were getting, what you needed at times you needed, and still continue to get that on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that's for anybody, no matter the circumstances they find in, is we have moments in our lives where we just need grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. And I just stumble into God's grace all day, every day. But I learned, so when Mason first came home, yes, she had Down syndrome. She was also very sick. So this was all in that month time. We found all this stuff out about her, that she was on oxygen 24/7 for a condition in her lungs. She needed open heart surgery. She was on multiple medication. I mean, all of a sudden we forget about Down syndrome. She's this sick little girl. So you pile that on. And when she had her heart surgery, I remember being in the hospital and having this like out of body experience where I'm sitting by her hospital bed. She's all tubes and all of it, right? It's pretty intense. She's 4 months old. And I remember, or she's 5 months old, looking at her and like looking at myself and thinking, we're doing this. Like, I'm doing this. I looked at people like this and thought, how could you ever?
Yeah.
And then when it's your kid or when it's your circumstance, you do it, and you do it with grace and you do it with grit and in the best way that you know how. And it was a moment that really, I like kind of chuckled to myself, like, I got this. Like, we got this. This is what we do. And I think that's kind of been the story, is things have all come up and continue to come up. It's like, this is what we do. And I think of it as like, I had a capacity. We all have like a capacity, almost like a balloon, right? And as you blow the balloon up, it expands, it expands, it expands. And my life and my emotions and my knowledge and my abilities have expanded over the years, slowly over time. So it's not like there was you need to do this thing, now you're equipped. It was like, no, it's a stepping into, it's an expansion, right? It's a growing. And yes, I did it with a child in the hospital having heart surgery, which isn't everyone's story, but everyone's got a thing that requires them to step into it, to allow expansion to happen, to grow minute by minute sometimes.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of people that have gone through things that you want to ask, how did you go through it? And their answer is, we just went through it.
Just do it.
You just do it, like you said. Now, I have no idea your childhood background. I have no idea your church or religious background. So I don't intend to pry. You can share what you want or don't share what you don't. I don't care. But what I found is when we had children, a lot of the things that I grew up with my perception of God, I realized was wrong when I looked at my children, and I realized the love that I had for them, the patience I had for them, the grace I had for them, the appreciation of their uniqueness, all those things I think I misunderstood about God growing up. And I felt like I started to understand the heart of a father, of a parent, better when I had children. Do you feel like you've learned maybe more about God by being a parent of these children?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it really is more about God's love for me. It is all about God's love for me, in that thinking how much I love my kids and what I would do for them, and to know that God's love for them is infinitely more.
Right.
And the peace that comes in that for me. And then also seeing how I just mess up all the time as a parent.
Right.
I just do. Every day I mess up. And sometimes it's big, and sometimes it's little, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's heartbreaking. And at the end of it all is grace, a gracious God. And in the morning, it's a new mercy. And stepping into that over and over. Parenthood, I was gonna say forces you, but gives you an opportunity to do that. And I think that is like a little bit, I just picture God being kind of cheeky in it, almost like, yep, this is what we do when we care for people, right? Or this is how it goes. Yeah.
I don't think we surprise him with our mistakes. I think he accounted for that when he decided to love us and call us to do things. I think he knew that. I think he's not surprised. We tend to be hard on ourselves. All right, this is the book, Different, A Great Thing to Be. And tell us a little bit about that and maybe what people can get from that, especially if they are trying to teach their children about others who are different.
Yeah, so you had asked your previous question about how parenting, has shown me more about God. Well, in addition, parenting kids with differences, parenting kids with disabilities, 2 kids with Down syndrome, and even a daughter who finds herself as the different person in our family often, our daughter truly, who is a different race than us, and realizing and knowing and believing with every ounce of me, when God says he created people in his image, it was all people. It wasn't a certain kind of people. Right. It wasn't just people without Down syndrome. That my kids with Down syndrome, created by God with an extra chromosome in every cell in their body, with pleasure, I believe, and with intent from God, that God's image is there. And so unless we have access to, or unless we're able to have proximity to people with disabilities, we're missing out on a big part of who God is if God's image is in people. So if we are always in spaces that are homogenous, we are going to get a tiny sliver of who God is, because God is in all different kinds of people. So we need all different kinds of people. So to bring it to this book, this idea that different, I think that everybody as a child, and I think as adults too, when we feel different, it's not a great feeling. It's not like, yes, I'm different. It's like, oh, I feel so different. Or this person's different. It's too different. It's uncomfortable. So how do we shift that narrative and celebrate it? How do we see the differences in others, and then in return in ourselves, as good, as incredible, as a part of God and God's image in us as something to learn from, as a way to grow, as something to celebrate. So sweet little Mason, my oldest daughter, has been my little muse in all of this, my greatest teacher in this. And she just shows up in the world pretty unashamedly as she is. And she shows up different with her disability. Mm-hmm. And she walks into spaces where most of the time that's not positive. Most of the time we're trying to figure out how to fit her into a mold. And what she's taught me, and what I've really adopted into my life and my understanding of how to be, is no. Her differences should be embraced and celebrated, not forced to be something else. And when we do that with her, when I do that with her, and when she does that with others, and I do it with myself, then we have an opportunity to really build bridges, to have understanding, curiosity instead of judgment. It really does start to open up the spaces that we live in to be more inclusive. And in doing that, to our collective humanity just grows and expands.
You've been received quite well, I would say, overall. Now, obviously, there's probably somebody who's made a stupid comment or a rude comment here and there. I get that. We all get that at some point. But you've got a lot of people that appreciate and love what you're doing. What do you see in the people that you're impacting?
I see a lot of people making that Mason and our family, for a lot of people, it's their first and maybe right now only introduction into disability, into people who are significantly different than them. And what it's doing is breaking down barriers that they had of judgment. And I'll have people reach out and say, like, little things, even like, my child is in a classroom with somebody who is fill in the blank and uses a wheelchair, or has a limb difference, or has Down syndrome. And because of your family, I feel like I have language to help my son build a bridge to relationship. Or big things where people will say, we got an in utero diagnosis for Down syndrome, and I would have terminated if I didn't know your daughter through Instagram. I mean, that kind of stuff is mind blowing. But yeah, it's like little steps for people into embracing the differences that they see around them, embracing disability.
So you brought up something that is a hot, divisive point, and that is the fact that we do have the technology to see inside the womb and to detect, to use your term, abnormalities that some people may not want to deal with and may not feel equipped to deal with. It may not be. I mean, I get that. Do you take any position when it comes to the issue of abortion?
I do. Yes, I do. And I unashamedly so.
Okay.
I am graciously, holistically pro-life, meaning womb to tomb. If you are going to throw a fit about somebody terminating a pregnancy in utero, but you're not caring about my 13-year-old daughter with Down syndrome who is birthed and needs support as a 13-year-old person, I care about it all. I need people to care about it all. I also would never look at a woman choosing to terminate and shame her, because that's where the grace part comes in. There's so many people have stories, and there are layers and layers and layers. I would hope that woman would parent. But there's more going on there than I can cast a judgment. You know what I mean? So I think that when it comes to specifically terminating people with Down syndrome in utero based solely on their diagnosis, I really do feel passionate about that. I think it's a form of eugenics, modern day eugenics. Yeah, I think it's saying this human who isn't even born yet, we've now decided what kind of life they're going to live and have. And that's absurd. It's absurd. So I feel passionately about that. I feel heartbroken for the families who choose that, because I know how good it can be. And
let me ask you about that, because the common, I think, perception is that it's a less quality life. What do you see in your kids?
I mean, I said this before, and it's one of Macy's best characteristics. I see a child who shows up in a world uninhibited, and I watch her and I think, man, I wish I was like that. There's a study done that I would need to look up where somebody talked to however many adults with Down syndrome, let's say 1,000 adults with Down syndrome, 1,000 without, and the percentage of people with Down syndrome who said they were happy, who were living a fulfilled life, was astronomically higher than those without. I think like, okay, so you have this baby who has all of the characteristics you want. How do you know, and this is morbid, I get it, but how do you know that that child's not going to grow up to be a drug addict? It's very unlikely that people with Down syndrome are going to grow up to be drug addicts. Very unlikely. Or like all of these things that can happen to our kids as they become adults. There is a lot within a Down syndrome diagnosis that you don't have to worry about that. Are there other things to worry about? Of course. But we also can't make a decision that there's a best way to be human. There's not a best way to be human.
Oh,
we don't get to say that, you know? And so if that's the whole point of even this, like bringing it full circle, this children's book, we have to create a foundation for our kids and for ourselves, for future generations, to be able to say, hey, this way of being human is different, but it's not worse than my way of being human. We're human, right?
Yeah.
It's imperative to create that foundation and shift that narrative so that we can go on as humans to appreciate and love one another and break down the barriers that exist and learn how to live alongside one another, not in opposition to one another.
Yeah, boy, that's a big statement. That is so true. It's not our place to decide, you know. Okay. I want to show people the website real quick. This is The Lucky Few. I'm sorry. This is heatheravis.com, where you can find out about The Lucky Few on Instagram and the podcast and the books, and there's all sorts of great things there. So do check that out. That is in the chat, heatheravis.com. And Heather, you are obviously a very nice person. So I am going to invite you to be the harshest you can be for just a moment for the greater good. And the greater good is this. What do people who know nothing about Down syndrome or disabilities in general tend to do that we should absolutely never, ever, ever, ever do? And we just need to know right now. You may not realize how foolish you are, but you need to stop doing this. I know you have to have a list of these things.
There's too many specifics. I think that the bigger picture is you need to stop looking at disabled people as less than. You need to assume competence. You need to assume competence, assume they can, assume that they are, and understand and believe that they are fully human as is. Stop trying to wish away, pray away, fix away their disability. And stop trying to think that you're better than them because you're not disabled, because it's just not true.
Oh boy. Okay, I have to ask.
Yeah.
Have you had people have you had people want to heal them?
I've had two instances where strangers prayed for Macy. One when she was on oxygen. So it was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's pray. We want her to be off oxygen and live a whole healthy life. And then they prayed for her Down syndrome to be healed. And then on a beach once in Hawaii, someone came up to us and said they were missionaries, which is also,
hey, well, at least you're on a beach in Hawaii.
I know,
so I mean, you know.
And said, can we pray for you? Like, yeah, prayer's great. And then prayed for her to be healed.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's a tough theological question. I mean, did you have to wrestle with that? I mean, I never even thought about that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think you could dig deep. There's a book called Down syndrome in theology, something like that. Yes, we could dig around and Jesus heals people, right? But where's the line? And Jesus healed Mason, and my son August also had a congenital heart defect. Their hearts are healed and they will live full lives. And as people with Down syndrome, they are totally healthy. Down syndrome is not a disease. It's not a sickness. It's a syndrome. So I think that that's a good thing to wrestle with, to think through.
Yeah.
Because even people who are wheelchair users, there's a lot of people who are wheelchair users who would say, this is who I am, or the deaf community. So many deaf people are like, don't you dare take away my deafness. This is who I am. And who's to say that that's not true?
Yeah. And you know, we don't, to get into the mystery of God, I grew up with poor vision, getting worse and worse. And we prayed many times for my vision to be healed. Both retinas ended up detaching. So, I mean, you know, it's like, where do you go with that? So, okay. The best advice you can give someone who knows someone or encounters someone with Downs or another disability who wants to approach in the right way? What's a good, smart, healthy approach?
Yeah, if there's not a relationship there and it's just a passing, like a smile and a hi,
Mm.
and that might open up to a conversation or a how are you, depending on the ages, you know. But if always my trickiest question I get asked a lot, you know, how do I make a friend with Down syndrome?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you make a friend, you know? And it's pretty much the same, but you've got to have proximity. If you don't have proximity, you can't have relationship, and that feels that's a tricky, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just force it. But if you have school-aged kids, I think that it's really good. Just like, hi, what's your name? Is a great starting point for a conversation with somebody.
That's great. I just appreciate what you're doing, the awareness and the grace with which you're handling it, and I know a lot of people do. Is there anything that you want people to know that I have overlooked, whether it's a book or a show or just a word of wisdom?
The only thing I can think of is if you're an educator or you're a pastor in a space where you're teaching others, we created a like a classroom kit, which has 9 different activities. It's 14 pages long to go with the book. A great thing to be. And it's free on our website. You just have to enter your email and you'll get downloadables that you can print and use. Back to school is coming. I mean, but it can be used anytime in conjunction with the book.
I think that's a great idea. Heather, Avis, I sure appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to our audience on Life Today Live. Just appreciate everything you do.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And you guys out there watching, see, this was great. I learned today, and there's a lot of room for that. So I guess it's not that big a deal. But no, I hope that this has helped you guys. And if you know someone that, especially someone who may be struggling with a loved one who has a disability, please do share. I think this will encourage people. And of course, if you haven't subscribed or followed, we encourage you to do that at Life Today TV, our handle on all the socials. And come back. I've got great interviews lined up the rest of this week, the rest of this month, and September's about halfway booked too. So it's exciting here on Life Today Live. We'll see you again next time.